Hello, all my beautiful computer science students. Welcome to another lesson in Unit 7, ArrayList. And this is going to be Lesson 2, where we are going to talk about ArrayList methods. In Lesson 1, we went over what an ArrayList is and how we create it. And now we're going to see some of the benefits of using an ArrayList over an array, and that's going to be using these methods. Now, there's a lot of methods here in ArrayList, but there's only 6 that you need to know for the AP exam. So we're going to focus on these 6 in the notes and in the assignments that we do in this class, but know that you can look it up anytime online in the documentation on what all of the methods you could possibly use might be. So we'll just focus on these 6, and I'm going to show you these 6, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about them and show you examples later on in the slides here. But these are the 6 you need to know for the AP exam, and what you'll see on the screen is how they are listed in the AP exam documentation. So you'll have these exactly as they're written on your exam sheet. So the first one is size. Size is a method that returns the number of elements in the list. We had something similar with an array called .length, but that wasn't a method, .length, with an array. With an array list, we only use methods to access, modify, and change. And .size, it returns the number of elements in your array list. We have the add method, and add OBJ means object, okay? And the E stands for just a generic element, whatever that element might be, integer, double, or a object that you create yourself. But it appends that object to the end of the list, and it does return true if you needed to verify that it actually did what it was supposed to do, but it always will. You'll never have to worry about it returning false. But add and then just the object in parentheses puts it at the end of the list. We also have an add that puts the object in a specific position, and that accepts 2 parameters, where the first parameter, index, represents where you want the object to be inserted at, what index, and it'll actually insert the object there, and it'll shift all of the other elements after that index, over by 1 and automatically resize the list. And remember, that was one of the benefits of an array list over an array. Is an array list, you have these methods that can shift and resize your array list with just a single statement. And you didn't have that in an array. So we didn't have anything like this with an array. But with an array list, we do. We have the get method, which is just an accessor. It gets whatever is in the location of the index you pass it. So it returns the element wherever that is. We have the set. So this is going to replace the object at position index with whatever you would like. And it does return the element that was formerly at that position, if you needed to use that in your code anywhere. And then the last one, we have remove. And it accepts a single integer index, and it removes whatever element is there, and it returns that element. Now, when it removes an element, it actually shifts everything back over to the left. So again, it automatically resizes. So these are the 6 that you have to know for the AP exam, and this is the exact syntax and wording that's on your basically your formula sheet for the AP exam. But I want to talk a little bit more about each of these methods and then give you some simple examples of how we use them. So let's talk about the adding elements. In order to add an element to an array list, use the add method. We talked about how you can create an array list, and when you create an array list on the AP exam, you're only creating it with the default constructor. So you have basically no elements starting off. So you'll have to use the add method to put any sort of elements onto your array list. And this method is an overloaded method. So that means that there's actually 2 methods with the same name, and which one we use is determined at runtime based on how many parameters we have. because the first add method accepts just a single parameter, an object of some kind, and it's used to add an element to the end of an array list. But the second add method accepts two parameters. One's an integer and one's the object, and you add an element at that specific index. And when you add it at that index, it actually shifts everything over in the array. So it inserts the object at that index, and then everything that comes after that index gets shifted over. Okay. So both of these methods do return a Boolean, letting you know if the addition was successful. But for the standard implementation, it'll always return true. Okay. And you don't necessarily need a variable to catch the fact that it returns true. And in fact, you'll see most of the code, we don't use a variable to catch true. The only scenario where this would potentially return false is a scenario that we're not going to encounter in this class. That would be if you have some sort of custom implementation of an array list that overrides these add methods and has it behave in a different way. Again, not something we run into in this class. So every time you use this add method, it'll be successful. Okay, so just trust me on that one. Let's see a little practice problem here. So what is printed after the program is run? Well, you know we have to do our import array list. That also allows us to use all these methods is when we import the array list. So we start off, we're going to create an array list of names, strings. So that first line just is an empty array list, right? So we use that default constructor there. And then I have names.add, and then in quotations, Austin. So Austin gets added to the array list. When I have, so now my array list just has Austin in it, one element. Next line, add Brian, okay? Because I'm using the add method, Brian gets put on at the end of that list. Okay. Now I'm going to use the add 1 comma Zeb. Okay, so that's going to add Zeb at index 1. Okay, so where is index 1? Well, Austin is 0, Brian is 1. Okay, so Zeb is going to go in 1, so that's where you see, and then Brian got shifted over. Okay, so this add method doesn't replace anything. We have a separate method for that. The add method inserts and then shifts everything over. So Austin stayed in the same spot. It was just everything that came, and by everything I mean just Brian, but it was everything that came after that insert got shifted over. Austin stayed in the same spot. So now my array list is Austin, Zeb, Brian, and now I want to add Olivia at index 3, 0, 1, 2. Well, what is index 3? Well, index 3 is actually the end of the list, right? So even though there's not currently an index 3, this is still okay because it'll put Olivia at index 3 at the end of the list. Essentially, this would be the same thing as if we just omitted that 3 and put add Olivia. It would add Olivia at the end. Both of them achieved the same thing. If I tried to do an index anywhere past 3, like if I tried a 4, 5, or 6, etc., I would get an error, a runtime error saying index out of bounds. Okay. All right. So the last line, we have Austin, Zeb, Brian, Olivia, and I want to add Gwen at 2. Okay. So this is what I have. This is currently index 2. So I'm going to put Gwen right in this space, and Brian and Olivia are going to get shifted over. Brian's going to go to position 3, and Olivia is going to get shifted into a new position 4. Excuse me. So we see Gwen went in at index 2, and Brian and Olivia got switched over. So now when I go to print off names, I print off those 5 names in that order. Excuse me. Okay, so that's 2 methods of the 6, and that's adding elements. Now let's talk about changing some elements. Okay, so after adding the elements, if you want to change them at any time, use the set method. Similar to our setters and getters, you know the whole drill. Set method. This method takes an index and an object that you want to insert at that index. It does return the element that was formerly at position, so whatever you ended up replacing it with, it will return that. But you don't have to have a variable to necessarily get that unless you want to. Okay. So here's an example of this. I didn't put it in here again, but let's go with this. Names is currently what I just ended with. Austin, Zeb, Gwen, Brian, Olivia. Okay, that's assume that code's already good. We're going to run a couple things here. I'm going to do names dot set 0 Tony. Okay, so at index 0 I have Austin. Okay, so what the set method does is it says goodbye Austin and hello Tony. Okay, nothing gets shifted in the set method, it just gets replaced, right? So Austin is goodbye, Tony is in. Okay, if I had that equal to a variable, that variable would store the name Austin, but I didn't here. Set 2 to Bruce. Okay, Gwen's at position 2. Goodbye, Gwen. Hello, Bruce. Okay, so you see it just gets replaced. So when I go to print off names, there's the list of my new names with Tony and Bruce put in there. We're assembling the Avengers, apparently. I did that on purpose. I'm an Avengers fan. But, you know, DC is great too. That's fine. No judgment. Removing elements. That's the set. That's all the set is. Okay. Right. We're just replacing elements at specific indexes. Removing elements. If we want to remove elements, we have the remove method. Okay. And this removes, and then in parentheses, we put the index that we want removed. So it takes an integer, removes the element at that integer, and actually all of the elements get shifted over when you remove that index there. And it does return, you should note too, it does return what was removed if you wanted a variable to capture that. Same thing with the set method, right? Same instance, but you don't need one. Okay. So here, names is currently what we just finished at, right? Tony, Zeb, Bruce, Brian, Olivia. And we're going to have two removals here. We're going to remove index 2. Okay, who's at index 2? That's going to be Bruce. Goodbye, Bruce. And when we remove Bruce, Brian and Olivia get shifted over. Okay, so notice that shift. Okay, I'll kind of go back and forth between these two slides. Bruce is gone. Brian and Olivia shifted over. Tony and Zeb stayed in the same position because they came before that index. If I want to remove index 3, who's at index 3? It's Olivia. She gets taken off. Tony, Zeb, and Brian, they came before index 3, and they stay in the same spot. They have the same indices. So now my name's Tony, Zeb, and Brian. Tony, Zeb, and Brian. Okay, my last two elements here. Yeah, names is currently Tony, Zeb, and Brian. Okay, so I wrote that at the top. Accessing elements. There's two methods that we use to access certain elements. You use the index to access any element. Okay, we know with an array to access an array, if names wasn't an array, we would use this to access, right? We would use those square brackets to access any sort of element. But we don't do that with an array list. That is just with arrays. We still have to use methods to access elements. So when we use the get method with, in parentheses, the index, it returns the element whatever is located at that index. So if I want to print off names.getZero, this says get the element at index 0 and return it to this method call. And in which case it would print off Tony, since Tony is at index 0. The other element, or the other piece of information you can get from the array list is the size of the array list. So we said size returns basically the length of an array list at any given time. And it's a method that accepts no parameters. So names.size currently with the array list we have will print off a 3 because there's 3 elements in names. Okay. And that covers everything, all of the bases. Those are all 6 methods that you have to know for an array list. for the AP exam. Okay, but there are many more. Okay, many more. So you can look them up anytime in that Oracle documentation. In class, we're going to practice using these 6, and you're only responsible knowing these 6. But on your in your project, or if you were to use any sort of array list in projects, you're welcome to look up some extra array list elements, array list methods to use on those elements. Go for it. Okay, the last thing we have in this lesson is a big practice problem, and I split it up on two separate slides here. So it's a big program, and we're basically just going to trace through and see what's printed after the program is run. Okay, several things are going to get printed to the console. Let's see what these several things do. So I have my import statement at the top, public class example. Everything's in the main method right now. I'm going to start off by creating an array list of integer values called mygrades, and it's just empty right now. Okay. Then I have mygrades.add80. Okay. And this is an example of using autoboxing. And we talked about autoboxing in lesson 1 about how an array list can only use objects. And if I want to use primitives in an array list, I basically have to box them up in their object classes. And luckily, Java uses autoboxing for us. So I see in parentheses, I'm adding, this is a primitive right now. It's 80. It's an integer, it's a primitive. And I'm trying to add that primitive to my array list that only accepts integer objects. But Java Smart uses autoboxing automatically behind the scenes. It converts that 80 into an integer object and puts that into my array list. So that's an example of where we use autoboxing. If Java didn't have autoboxing, that would be the next line here, integer.value of 90. So this is one of the ways we take a primitive and convert it into its integer object, is with value of. So this explicitly changes that 90 primitive into an integer object and then adds it to the list. So this is an example that doesn't use autoboxing, which is not tested on the AP exam. You don't have to know that part specifically. You can take full advantage of Java using autoboxing, and that's what these last 2 lines do. All of these adds had just one parameter, which meant it just added that to the end of my grades. So by the end, when we print off my grades, we see here my grades is just the 80, 90, 85, 76. So that would be what is printed off. Okay. Yeah, okay. Program continues. Now let's get into some interesting things. So this is currently, I have right here, the current state of my grades, okay, just carried over from the other slide. So let's go and say I wanted to add 1, 93. Okay, 1 is this index right here. So I'm going to put 93 at index 1, and all of these elements are going to get shifted over to the right. So 93 goes in at index 1, and notice how, again, those 3 got shifted over. Okay? The add doesn't override anything. It automatically shifts the elements over. So same thing here, add an 89 at index 2. This is index 2. I'm going to add 89 there. Everything to the right got shifted over. Now I'm going to use 2 methods. I have add 2, mygrades.getZero. Okay. So first, remember with your method chaining here, you do the inside method first. So mygrades.getZero, that's 80. Okay. That is the integer 80. So at index 2, I'm going to add an 80. Okay. So at index 2 here, you're going to see I'm going to put an 80 in there. At index 2, and all the other 4 elements got shifted over. Okay. And the last one, set. Okay, so set index 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to set index 4 to a 97, and the set method doesn't shift. So nothing got shifted there. It went from 90 to 97. Nothing was shifted. The set actually just replaces it. Now, in these print line statements, I'm using the remove method, so it actually removes whatever's at that index, but then remember the remove method also returns what was removed, okay? Which you don't always have to have a print line statement for or have a variable to capture, but in this case you will. So it says mygrades.remove2. 0, 1, 2, this is index 2. So this removes it, and then it does return it to the original method call. And because that original method call is inside a print line statement, your 80 is going to get printed off since that was what was taken out, right? So not only did the 80 get removed, everything, so see here, 80 got removed and it printed to the console. But then everything shifted over. So this 89, 97, 85, 76, it all got shifted back to the left. Okay. So just like your add method shifts everything over to the right, your remove method shifts everything over to the left. Okay. So 80 was removed and then printed to the console. We're going to have the same situation for remove 4. 85 is at index 4. So it's going to get removed and returned to the method call where it will get printed off. And it's also removed from mygrades. Okay. Okay, almost done here. Now I have my set. Again, I have kind of a double piece here. I have a method inside of a method, mygrades.size. So the size of mygrades right now is a 5. So that 5 is the size. And then I do the operation 5 minus 2, which is 3. So this is saying set index 3 equal to an 88. So 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Get set equal to an 88 there. Okay. Mygrades.size again, add 5, comma 70. So this is saying at index 5, add a 70. Okay. Where is index 5? 2, 3, 4. There is no index 5, so this puts it right on the end there. It creates an index 5. Okay. Now, again, what I said earlier, if you tried using like a 6, 7, or 8 here, something beyond that last index, you'll get an ArrayList index out of bounds or an index out of bounds. Okay. So be careful with that. So 70 gets added to the end. The last method here, 3, mygrades.getZero. So again, that .getZero is their accessor. At index 0 is an 80. So I'm going to set index 3 equal to an 80. Okay. So index 3 right here gets set equal to an 80. And then there's the contents of mygrades that get printed off at the end. All right, that is the last slide of our lesson. So thank you guys so much for following along with lesson 2, and I will see you next time.